Welcome back to our channel, where we bring you the most compelling, dramatic, and emotionally charged updates from the glamorous and treacherous world of daytime television. Today is a beautiful day to dive deep into the unfolding tragedies and corporate warfare taking Los Angeles by storm. Grab a comfortable seat and prepare yourself for an intense journey, because the stakes have reached an unprecedented, life-altering climax for the Forrester and Logan families. Let us unpack the devastating events that are reshaping the fashion industry forever. The world of haute couture is built upon a delicate foundation of legacy, artistic vision, and an unspoken, profound reverence for the pioneers who stitched the very fabric of the industry together. For decades, Eric Forrester has stood as the undisputed, towering titan of this glamorous realm, a living legend whose creative genius breathed life into the global phenomenon known as Forrester Creations. His sketches are not merely ink on paper. They're the physical, tangible manifestations of his soul, his rich history, and his enduring passion for creating breathtaking beauty. To truly understand the magnitude of the impending catastrophe, one must first recognize the absolute sanctity of Eric's life work. These specific designs, initially promised to Katie Logan Spencer during a fleeting, complicated moment of collaboration, were the absolute culmination of his finest inspirations. Yet, when the promise was inevitably broken and the designs were reclaimed by the Forrester patriarch, the stage was meticulously set for a brutal corporate war that would soon transcend the sterile environment of the boardroom and strike a devastating, potentially fatal blow directly at the human heart. The unyielding ambition of Katie Logan Spencer, combined with the ruthless, predatory business acumen of Bill Spencer, created a perfect, unstoppable storm of defiance. Convinced of their righteous, unwavering entitlement to Eric's unfinished masterpieces, the newly minted Logan brand pushed forward with an audacious, aggressive global launch. This was not a quiet, understated debut in a boutique Los Angeles showroom. It was a spectacular, unapologetic declaration of war broadcasted simultaneously across the entire world. From the blinding, neon-lit expanse of Times Square in New York to the historic, romantic piazzas of Milan and the bustling, hypermodern intersections of Tokyo, the Logan name was plastered across colossal, inescapable digital billboards. The entire world was formally invited to witness the birth of a new fashion empire, built entirely upon the stolen, manipulated genius of a beloved patriarch. Katie and Bill stood together at the precipice of unimaginable wealth and absolute industry dominance, their faces illuminated by the intoxicating glow of their own triumph, entirely oblivious to the devastating, lethal shockwave they were sending directly into the executive suites of Forrester Creations. Inside the opulent, usually quiet sanctuary of the Forrester Creations CEO office, the atmosphere was suddenly thick with an impending, suffocating sense of doom. Eric Forrester, a man whose hands had draped the most famous, beautiful women in the world for over half a century, stood completely alone, his aging eyes fixed in absolute horror on a live, high-definition broadcast of the Logan fashion event. The massive television screen illuminated the darkened room with vibrant, pulsating colors and striking, familiar silhouettes. But what Eric saw was a grotesque, nightmarish distortion of his own reflection. His most cherished, intimate designs, the very essence of his creative spirit and the legacy he intended to leave behind, had been violently altered, stripped of their elegant Forrester identity, and paraded shamelessly under the banner of his greatest rivals. The visceral, paralyzing shock of this betrayal was not merely a professional disappointment. It was a profound, deeply personal violation of his trust and his artistic integrity. Every altered hemline, every modified neckline, and every changed fabric choice felt like a brutal, physical blow to his chest. The Logan logo, stamped boldly and arrogantly over his life's work, was a searing, unforgivable insult that bypassed his rational, forgiving mind and struck directly at his fragile, overworked heart. The immense psychological trauma of witnessing his legacy hijacked and bastardized on a global stage triggered a catastrophic, immediate physical response within the patriarch. The sheer weight of the betrayal was simply too immense, the theft too brazen and cruel for his aging cardiovascular system to bear. A sudden, agonizing tightness gripped Eric's chest with the force of a vice, a suffocating, crushing pressure that violently robbed him of his breath and his physical balance. The vibrant, mocking colors of the Logan broadcast blurred into a sickening, chaotic kaleidoscope as the luxurious office began to spin out of control. He reached out desperately, his trembling, manicured fingers grasping frantically for the solid edge of his heavy mahogany desk. But the legendary strength that had built an international empire suddenly and completely abandoned him. The heavy, oppressive silence of the executive office was abruptly shattered by the sickening, terrifying thud of a living legend falling helplessly to the floor. Eric Forrester, the patriarch, the visionary, the undisputed king of Los Angeles fashion, lay completely immobilized, his shallow, ragged breaths echoing in the empty room as the digital billboards outside his window continued to mock his genius with their blinding, stolen brilliance. The horrific discovery of Eric's collapsed, unresponsive form sent an immediate, terrifying shockwave of pure panic through the busy corridors of Forrester Creations. The frantic, blood-curdling screams of a terrified executive assistant pierced the usual, rhythmic hum of sewing machines and ringing telephones, instantly transforming the epicenter of global fashion into a chaotic, desperate scene of absolute terror. Paramedics rushed through the heavy glass doors, their urgent, commanding voices and heavy, pounding footsteps completely drowning out the ambient, soothing music of the main lobby. As Eric was carefully but swiftly loaded onto a waiting stretcher, a plastic oxygen mask strapped tightly over his pale, ashen face, the devastating reality of the situation crashed down upon his horrified family. This was no longer a mere health scare or a temporary moment of weakness. This was a desperate, terrifying fight for survival, a brutal battle against the dying of the light. The wailing, piercing sirens of the ambulance cut violently through the dense Los Angeles traffic, carrying the beloved patriarch away from the towering empire he built and toward the sterile, unforgiving, and terrifying environment of the hospital's intensive care unit. Upon arriving at the hospital, the sterile, brightly lit waiting room instantly transformed into a suffocating purgatory of agonizing uncertainty for the shattered Forrester family. Ridge Forrester, a man entirely defined by his fierce, protective ferocity and his deep, unwavering love for his father, paced the cold linoleum floor like a caged, dangerous predator. His mind raced uncontrollably, endlessly replaying the sequence of treacherous events that had led to this catastrophic, life-threatening moment. The overwhelming, paralyzing grief threatening to consume his soul was rapidly and dangerously transmuting into a cold, hardened, and absolute rage. He knew exactly, without a shadow of a doubt, who was directly responsible for the tangled wires attached to his father's chest and the rhythmic, terrifying machines currently keeping him alive. This tragedy was not a random, unfortunate act of biology or the natural progression of age. It was a direct, undeniable consequence of Bill Spencer's ruthless, insatiable greed and Katie Logan's blind, unforgivable ambition. Every single mechanical beep of the heart monitor echoing from the ICU fueled the raging inferno of Ridge's anger, cementing a dark, unbreakable vow of absolute vengeance that would surely echo through the generations. He swore to himself, with a terrifying, silent, and deadly intensity, that if his father did not walk out of this hospital alive, the Spencer and Logan families would face a brutal reckoning unlike anything they had ever seen or imagined. Standing right beside him, Steffi Forrester Finnegan perfectly mirrored her father's devastating, uncompromising fury. Steffi had always been the fierce, unapologetic protector of the Forrester name, the unrelenting, loyal guardian of her grandfather's monumental legacy. Seeing the usually invincible, larger-than-life Eric Forster reduced to a fragile, helpless patient tethered to life support completely shattered her heart, but also simultaneously ignited her terrifying, unstoppable warrior spirit. She understood the dark, cynical mechanics of the corporate sabotage that had placed the patriarch in this hospital bed. The Logan brand's aggressive global broadcast was not just a competitive business maneuver. It was a targeted, malicious assassination of Eric's creative spirit and his emotional well-being. Steffi's profound grief instantly crystallized into a singular, uncompromising, and deadly mission. She would not simply defeat Bill Spencer in the sterile confines of a corporate boardroom. She would entirely obliterate his empire from the face of the earth. She would systematically dismantle the Logan brand piece by piece, thread by thread, ensuring that the entire world knew exactly how their stolen, fraudulent success was paid for with the literal lifeblood of a fashion icon. The powerful bond between father and daughter solidified completely in that sterile, heartbreaking hospital room, united by a shared, unbreakable promise of absolute, total retribution. While the Forresters kept their grim, tear-filled vigil at the hospital, the atmosphere across town at the newly established Logan brand headquarters was experiencing a violent, psychological whiplash, transitioning instantly from absolute euphoria to paralyzing horror. Katie Logan Spencer had been riding the spectacular crest of an unimaginable, historic wave of triumph. The expensive champagne had been poured, the congratulatory toast had been made, and the initial staggering sales projections were shattering every single established industry record. But the intoxicating, dizzying high of unparalleled success was instantly and brutally obliterated the exact moment the devastating news of Eric's sudden collapse reached her ringing phone. All the vibrant color drained instantly from Katie's face as the horrifying, undeniable reality of her selfish actions finally took hold of her conscience. She had desperately convinced herself that utilizing Eric's designs was a justified, purely business decision, a necessary reclamation of a broken promise that she was owed. She had completely shielded her fragile conscience with Bill's ruthless, calculating logic, willfully ignoring the nagging, persistent intuition that warned her of the catastrophic, emotional fallout. Now, the abstract, easily dismissed concept of collateral damage had physically manifested into the horrifying, undeniable image of a man she once deeply loved and respected fighting for his very life in a cold hospital bed. The internal, psychological conflict tearing Katie apart was incredibly profound, agonizing, and completely inescapable. Every single congratulatory text message pinging on her phone felt like a brutal, physical accusation, a sharp knife twisting in her gut. She was suddenly and violently suffocating beneath the crushing, unbearable weight of her own unchecked ambition. How could she possibly celebrate a massive corporate victory that was built directly upon the literal, physical collapse of Eric Forster? The beautiful, meticulously crafted garments hanging in her pristine showroom, the very items that had just secured her global triumph, now looked exactly like morbid evidence at a gruesome crime scene. Katie's mind spiraled uncontrollably into a dark, bottomless abyss of severe guilt, panic, and self-recrimination. She had always prided herself on being the moral, ethical compass of the Logan family, the sister who navigated the treacherous, shark-infested waters of Los Angeles society with unwavering integrity and a pure heart. Yet, in her desperate, blinding bid to finally step out of the overwhelming shadows of her family and forge her own massive legacy, she had committed the ultimate, unforgivable betrayal. The sickening realization that she might be held directly responsible for the death of a living legend was a psychological burden that threatened to crush her sanity entirely. Bill Spencer, ever the pragmatic, emotionally detached, and ruthless titan of industry, immediately recognized the massive existential threat this sudden medical tragedy posed to their newly launched, incredibly lucrative empire. He saw the paralyzing, destructive guilt completely consuming Katie and moved swiftly, aggressively to insulate her from the impending, massive public relations storm. Bill's perspective remained unapologetically cold and calculating. The business world was a brutal battlefield, and unfortunate casualties were simply an inevitable, unavoidable reality of corporate warfare. He attempted to rationalize the horrifying situation to Katie, forcefully arguing that Eric's severe health issues were a pre-existing medical condition, completely and totally separate from the launch of the Logan brand. Bill's primary, unwavering objective was to aggressively protect his massive financial investment and his romantic partner, rapidly erecting an impenetrable, aggressive fortress of public relations spin and high-powered legal defense around Katie. He absolutely refused to let the grieving Forrester family weaponize this unfortunate medical emergency to destroy the massive empire they had just built. However, Bill's aggressive, highly defensive posture only served to isolate the grieving Katie further, starkly highlighting the terrifying contrast between his ruthless, unfeeling pragmatism and her shattering, all-consuming emotional devastation. The immense tragedy of Eric Forrester's massive heart attack could not possibly be contained within the sterile, quiet walls of the Los Angeles hospital. The devastating news leaked with the explosive, uncontrollable velocity of a raging wildfire, instantly consuming the global fashion industry and dominating every major news outlet. The public narrative shifted with brutal, whiplash-inducing speed. The Logan brand's massive debut, initially hailed by critics as a triumphant, beautifully disruptive force in the market, was suddenly and violently recast in a sinister, macabre, and highly toxic light. The global media, always ravenously hungry for a scandal of this epic magnitude, began connecting the dots with ruthless, unforgiving efficiency. The timeline of events was entirely undeniable. The massive global broadcast of the altered Forrester designs directly and exactly coincided with the beloved patriarch's sudden, catastrophic collapse. The glowing headlines instantly transformed from enthusiastic celebrations of Katie's entrepreneurial spirit to damning, vicious indictments of her complete moral bankruptcy. The absolute public relations nightmare that even Bill Spencer had partially anticipated arrived with a ferocity and scale that he could not fully mitigate or control. The Logan brand was no longer the shining darling of the fashion world. It was instantly branded as the cruel, heartless villain in a tragic, unfolding melodrama. The immediate backlash from the tight-knit fashion community was incredibly swift, severe, and absolutely merciless. Powerful industry insiders, fierce loyalists to the legendary Forrester legacy, and highly influential fashion critics launched a coordinated, devastating, and highly publicized boycott of the entire Logan brand. The very same massive digital billboards that had proudly announced Katie's global triumph now served as glaring, inescapable reminders of her alleged, unforgivable cruelty. High-profile international buyers immediately canceled their massive orders. Influential A-list celebrities publicly and loudly distanced themselves from the toxic label, and social media erupted with an unprecedented, terrifying torrent of vitriol directed squarely at Katie Logan Spencer. The narrative was permanently cemented in the global public consciousness. Katie Logan had indirectly, but undeniably, driven a living, breathing legend to his death simply for the sake of a higher profit margin. The beautiful designs that were meant to establish her as a formidable, independent force in the industry had instantly become a highly toxic asset, a heavy, suffocating albatross around her neck that threatened to completely sink her entire enterprise and her personal reputation before it even truly began. This brutal, highly public execution of Katie's character was exactly the ammunition that Ridge and Steffi Forrester needed to heavily fuel their unrelenting campaign of vengeance. They realized they did not even need to launch a formal, drawn-out lawsuit to destroy the Logan brand. The unforgiving court of public opinion was already delivering a swift, devastating guilty verdict on their behalf. Ridge watched the massive global boycott unfold with a grim, chilling, and highly calculated satisfaction. He saw the complete destruction of Katie's reputation as the absolute first necessary step in avenging his fallen father. He utilized his incredibly extensive network of loyal industry contacts to secretly amplify the public outrage, subtly but effectively fanning the massive flames of the boycott while carefully maintaining a public facade of grieving, dignified, and heartbroken silence. Steffi, meanwhile, aggressively mobilized the formidable, world-class public relations machinery of Forrester Creations, ensuring that the tragic narrative of Eric's victimization remained at the absolute forefront of the global conversation. They were masterfully weaponizing their patriarch's tragedy, turning his desperate fight for life into a devastating, unstoppable offensive against their hated enemies. The bitter, agonizing irony of the entire situation was a jagged pill for Katie to swallow as she watched her dreams crumble. She had embarked on this massive, stressful journey to finally prove her independence, to step completely out from beneath the overwhelming, suffocating shadows of Brooke, Ridge, and the entire Forrester dynasty. She had desperately wanted to create something beautiful, something uniquely and undeniably her own. Instead, she had inadvertently and permanently tethered her entire legacy to the darkest, most tragic, and painful chapter in Forrester history. The massive financial success she had craved was now entirely meaningless, completely overshadowed by the terrifying, rhythmic, and fragile beeping of Eric's hospital heart monitor. Every single dollar the Logan brand managed to earn felt exactly like dirty blood money burning her hands. The immense psychological toll of the intense public hatred, combined with her own paralyzing, inescapable guilt, began to severely fracture Katie's spirit and her mind. She found herself completely trapped in a terrifying nightmare of her own making, surrounded by the hollow, meaningless victory of a successful launch, while the brilliant man who had inspired it all hovered dangerously on the absolute brink of death. As the agonizing days slowly bled into sleepless nights, the atmosphere in Los Angeles remained incredibly tense, a city collectively holding its breath while a legendary titan fought a desperate battle for his life. The hospital waiting room became the absolute epicenter of a sprawling, multi-generational conflict that touched every single corner of the canvas. The bitter feud between the Forresters and the Logans, a legendary rivalry that had defined decades of television history, had escalated into a total war of unprecedented life-or-death stakes. This was no longer merely about stolen fashion designs, clever boardroom maneuvering, or messy romantic entanglements. This was entirely about life, death, and the ultimate devastating price of unchecked, ruthless ambition. If Eric Forrester succumbed to his massive heart attack, the resulting explosion of profound grief and uncontrollable rage would irrevocably destroy the fabric of both powerful families forever. The Logan brand would be permanently branded with the inescapable mark of Cain, and the Forrester family would unleash a terrifying crusade of absolute vengeance that would leave